An offer to visit North Korea. A report says Pope Francis has not ruled out visiting an officially atheist country. We're at the Vatican. Mounting evidence. New details point to Saudi Arabia's involvement in the disappearance of a journalist. A battle at the border. 2,000 migrants continue their march from Honduras to the U.S. What President Trump is saying in response. And the March for Life makes a move. We have a major announcement about this year's event. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, October 18th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. The United States Justice Department opens an investigation into clergy sexual abuse in Pennsylvania. The Associated Press reports federal prosecutors have served subpoenas across the state, seeking a trove of sensitive files and testimony from Catholic leaders. The investigation follows the state's grand jury report released in August, which detailed hundreds of allegations of children being sexually abused by Catholic priests. But Attorney General Josh Shapiro concluded almost no charges in Pennsylvania could be filed because of the statute of limitations. We reached out to the Justice Department for comment. They said they do not confirm nor deny the existence or non-existence of an investigation. Also in Pennsylvania, a Catholic priest pleads guilty to sexually abusing children. Father David Paulson was one of 2 clergy members charged as a result of the state's grand jury probe. Sentencing has not been scheduled, but officials expect Paulson to have to register as a sex offender for at least a decade. Pope Francis today expressed his willingness to visit North Korea if officially invited. The Holy Father met with South Korean President Moon Jae-in at the Vatican today. Moon had conveyed North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's desire for a papal visit. A formal invitation is expected to follow. If the visit happens, Francis would be the first pope to visit the communist country. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley joins us from St. Peter's Square. Juliet, this was a much anticipated meeting because of the rumors about the invitation. How did it go?
Lauren, the private audience lasted 35 minutes and included an exchange of gifts. Moon, who is Catholic, presented the Pope with a relief of Christ's face by a Korean artist, and the president said the wreath of thorns on Jesus' head represents the suffering of his people. For his part, the Pope gave Moon a medal engraved with an olive branch, and Francis said it represents his desire for peace on the Korean peninsula. Now, during their exchange, Moon told the Pope he's not only the head of the Catholic Church, but a teacher for humanity. And Francis urged Moon to work for peace.
Did the Vatican indicate whether the Pope would accept the invitation to go to North Korea?
Lauren, according to the office of President Moon, Francis indicated he's willing to visit the communist country, but the Vatican did not confirm that. Usually there's a long protocol before announcing a papal visit, Lauren. The Holy See says the Korean leader and the Vatican Secretary of State discussed education and health care, as well as peace and dialogue. And if the Pope were to go to North Korea, Lauren, it would be groundbreaking. The Vatican doesn't even have diplomatic ties with North Korea. The communist country prohibits religion, and Catholic priests were expelled long ago. So it's even hard to get exact numbers on how many Catholics the country has today. Now, estimates range from 800 to 3,000, and that's in very sharp contrast to South Korea, which has more than 5 million Catholics, Lauren.
Juliet, President Moon is himself Catholic, and last night he attended Mass in St. Peter's Basilica, celebrated by Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Secretary of State. What were the highlights of that service?
Now, Parolin used his homily to speak of the gift of peace on the Korean peninsula after so many years of tensions and division. And at the end of the Mass, Lauren, President Moon said the prayers offered will also resound as echoes of hope, he said, in the hearts of the people of the two Koreas. Last month, Lauren, Seoul and Pyongyang signed a broad agreement aimed at curbing military tensions. And you'll remember that Moon was key in setting up President Trump's meeting with Kim Jong-un in June, where the focus was on creating a nuclear-free peninsula.
North Korea has tried to get a pontiff to visit in the past unsuccessfully. What happened?
Indeed, Lauren, back in 2000, Pope John Paul II received an invitation to visit, but that never materialized. And the Vatican, until now, has always insisted that a papal visit could only be possible on condition Catholic priests were accepted in North Korea. Francis, however, seems to be taking a less absolutist approach in diplomacy, and just last month signed a historic accord, as you remember, with China. And China is North Korea's strongest ally. And that accord was over bishops' nominations. So on top of that, we understand that when Moon traveled to Pyongyang for the summit last month, he was joined by a Korean Catholic bishop to try to improve relations between the church in the two countries. So, Lauren, no, it's not the first time a pontiff is invited to North Korea, but this time perhaps the outcome might be more successful.
Juliette Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent from St. Peter's Square. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren.
At the Synod on the Youth, an Ethiopian cardinal expresses his concern over Europe's handling of migration issues.
It is sad when we hear that some borders are being closed to needy people who are escaping poverty and war and conflict in Europe.
Cardinal Sue Raphael made the comment at today's Vatican press briefing at the Synod on the Youth. The month-long meeting is a gathering of more than 250 bishops from 5 continents. They are discussing how to help young people find their vocation in the church. President Trump lashes out on Twitter, threatening to call up the U.S. military and close the southern border. He's warning Mexico and Central American countries to stop a caravan of about 3,000 migrants now before they reach the U.S. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. President Trump is upping the ante, provoked by thousands of Hondurans who have their eyes set on crossing the U.S. border. First, he threatened to cut millions of dollars in aid to Honduras. Now he's warning Guatemala and El Salvador he's slashing their aid money if the caravan isn't turned around. Here in the U.S., Catholic bishops ask for an open mind, considering our call to help strangers in need. Video shows dozens of Honduran migrants clamoring to board trucks. They're part of a much larger group doing whatever they can to inch closer to the U.S. border. Marta Fajardo offers mercy to the migrants. The Guatemalan woman makes a meal for them as they pass by. President Trump takes a much different approach. He sent a series of tweets today accusing Democrats of pushing for open borders and weak immigration laws. He says they're doing little to stop this large flow of people, including many criminals, from entering the U.S. The president renewed his threat to cut funding to Central American countries unless they do something to block the caravan.
The president continues to fearmonger around the issue of immigration. He knows that we're 19 days away from an election, and he's trying to use this issue to gin up his base.
Former U.S. Housing Secretary Julian Castro rails against President Trump. Catholic bishops have reservations, too. I spoke with Bill Canny, the executive director of the USCCB's Migration and Refugee Services. He told me Catholic social teaching does not advocate for open borders, but the church also has great concern for the vulnerable.
A family has the right to migrate when they can't take care of themselves, particularly the youth in the family who need to go to school, who need to eat sufficiently to grow. People do have the right to move when that's not happening.
Canny says cutting aid to poor countries wouldn't prevent people from fleeing.
Increase effective aid to those countries so people can stay there.
A priest who runs a migrant shelter in the capital of Guatemala says about 3,000 people slept there overnight. Many migrants left early this morning to continue their journey as more arrive. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. President Trump says it appears missing journalist Jamal Khashoggi is dead, saying it is very sad and there will be severe consequences depending on the results of the Saudi investigation into the incident. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is asking President Trump to give the Saudis just a few more days in order to complete their investigation. Pompeo says he wants to see the results of both that Saudi Arabia-led investigation and a separate Turkey-led investigation before the United States decides how to respond. He's hoping to get a complete picture of what happened to 60-year-old Jamal Khashoggi. Mike Pompeo meeting with the president at the White House after returning from a quick trip to Turkey and Saudi Arabia, asking questions about their investigations into Jamal Khashoggi, a Saudi national and U.S. resident who disappeared 2 weeks ago.
I told President Trump this morning that we ought to give them a few more days to complete that so that we too have a complete understanding of the facts surrounding that.
Khashoggi, who wrote critical articles of the Saudi crown prince, was last seen on October 2nd when he entered the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey. He never came out. Turkish authorities, who have been combing the facility, believe Khashoggi was killed. The Saudis have denied involvement. The president has changed his tone, moving from threatening Saudi Arabia to saying there should be no rush to judgment.
They're an important ally, but I want to find out what happened, where is the fault, and we will probably know that by the end of the week.
The president's political opponents, like House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, accuse him of covering for Saudi Arabia for financial gain. Some publications report $100 million pledged this summer from Saudi Arabia to help fight terrorism arrived in American accounts on Tuesday, the same day Pompeo arrived in Riyadh.
The president has been very clear. He has said, follow the money. If we have a good commercial deal with Saudi Arabia, we shouldn't be concerned if they're killing journalists.
The president denies those claims after his meeting this morning with Pompeo. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin announcing he will not attend an investment conference in Saudi Arabia next week. Other financial ministers from the UK, France, and Netherlands have also pulled out, all saying they will wait until the investigations are over. Secretary Pompeo also said today Saudi Arabia is an important counterterrorism partner and strategic ally in the Middle East. They also buy billions of dollars in U.S. weapons, some of which is used to counter their adversary, Iran. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. Joining me now is Representative Francis Rooney, Republican from Florida and former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See. Welcome back to the program, sir.
Thanks for having me back on, Lauren.
In less than a week, President Trump has moved from threatening Saudi Arabia with severe punishment to saying there should be no rush to judgment about its involvement in the Khashoggi disappearance. What message do you believe this sends, and does it add to the perception that the U.S. values business relationships above all else?
Well, I don't have any problem with what he said this morning, that recounting that Saudi is a strong and long-standing ally in a counter to Iran and all that, but that also that we need to get to the bottom of this and get all the facts. What I'm hopeful for is that we're going to have a clear and transparent presentation of all possible evidence that could be adduced.
There are reports that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, when he was visiting Saudi Arabia, that they made good on their pledge of $100 million to the U.S. to help stabilize parts of Syria liberated from ISIS. What do you make of the timing of that payment? Is it just coincidence?
I think it's highly suspect timing. And again, we need to get to the bottom of this and not shrink from doing the right thing like we would to any other country around the world that commits these kind of atrocities, if in fact the Saudi leadership is complicit in it, and not make an exception just because of our special relationship with them.
The U.S. defense of Saudi Arabia now also seems to put the Trump administration, which just secured the release of American pastor Andrew Brunson from a Turkish prison, at odds with Turkey to produce video and audio evidence of its claims that Saudi Arabia murdered Khashoggi. So as a former diplomat, what is the balance the U.S. needs to maintain as the Turkish and Saudi investigations play out?
Well, it sounds like the Secretary's trip to both Saudi and Turkey was reasonably successful in engaging both of them in the joint inspection. Now we need all the evidence. I think we need to say this is a global concern and we need all the evidence. If Turkey's got a tape of what they think happened, then they should serve it up.
You are a proponent of the, you always talk about the Magnitsky Act, going directly after individuals who made criminal decisions and carried them out. What if that can't be determined? Who's responsible for the disappearance and murder. Would you be in favor of applying this to Saudi officials?
Sure, absolutely. Like I said, I don't think we can deal differently with Saudi Arabia if, in fact, their leadership or their people perpetrated some kind of crime like this than we've done with Russia or Korea or Iran or anybody else.
And today, before we let you go, as a former ambassador to the Holy See, President Moon Jae-in he was a Catholic, met today with Pope Francis and extended an invitation from North Korean President Kim Jong-un to visit North Korea. What's the likelihood the Pope will accept the invitation?
You know how this Pope is. He very well might do it. And I'm not so sure it'd be such a bad thing. You know, we have such a strong Catholic community in South Korea that maybe there's an opportunity to make things better for Catholics in the North, combined with President Trump's tough diplomacy, which has brought more attention from the North towards peace.
Thank you so much for your insights, Representative Francis Rooney, Republican from Florida, former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See.
Thanks for having me on.
3 top Afghan officials are killed by their own security guards in Kabul. The target was a U.S. general. He survived without injury, although 3 other Americans were wounded. The elite guards turned their guns on their colleagues during a meeting ahead of Saturday's parliamentary elections. Russian President Vladimir Putin is hailing his new arsenal of hypersonic missiles. The leader says the weapons give Moscow an advantage over its competitors. He adds the Kremlin will use them only in response to an incoming attack. Speaking at a policy forum in Sochi, Putin also says he thinks ties between Russia and the United States are improving. Protests erupt as women are set to enter one of the world's largest Hindu pilgrimage sites for the first time in nearly 30 years. Females aged 10 to 50 had been barred from the temple since 1991. The country's Supreme Court last month lifted the ban. But both India's ruling party and its main opposition group are against it and are in favor of the protesters who are blocking women from entering. Some religious figures consider menstruating women to be impure. Canada has legalized recreational marijuana, and the country's Catholic bishops are expressing their opposition, saying there will be growing problems in a society more dependent on narcotics and alcohol. Under the new laws, Canada is the world's largest lawful marketplace for marijuana. Both Catholic candidates in Brazil's runoff presidential election are reaching out to religious leaders to boost their chances of victory. The far-right contender, who is ahead in the polls, met yesterday with the Archbishop of Rio. Jair Bolsonaro has come under criticism after saying some Catholic groups in Brazil were rotten. His opponent, leftist Fernando Haddad, wants to shore up support of evangelical leaders. The runoff election is October 28th. Brazil is home to the world's largest number of Catholics. Coming up, a Christian fire chief dismissed for defending traditional marriage is $1 million richer. A report in The Atlantic says the founder of a global abortion pill provider company will start distributing abortion drugs to the U.S. through the mail. A group fighting for the unborn calls it, quote, a disaster waiting to happen, and Aid Action, the name of the company, will screen women online for their eligibility to take the pill and will charge $95. Americans United for Life is exploring the possibility of congressional intervention. A legal victory for a former Atlanta fire chief fired for writing a book about his Christian beliefs. He will receive $1.2 million in a settlement. Kelvin Cochran alleged that his firing occurred when he shared his book, which condemned sex outside of marriage and homosexual acts. Correspondent Jason Calvi joins us. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Former Fire Chief Kelvin Cochran says he was living a lifelong dream. A dream he says the city of Atlanta snuffed out. But after filing a lawsuit and testifying it right here on Capitol Hill, now he can close this chapter.
My faith does not teach me to discriminate against anyone.
Calvin Cochran is no longer fighting fires, but he's finally quenched the national firestorm that once engulfed him. In 2013, Cochran wrote, "Who Told You That You Were Naked?" He shared his book with some of his Christian firefighters, including assistant chiefs. It says sex is only for married couples and includes a list of what he calls unclean acts, homosexuality, bestiality, and all other forms of sexual perversion. He told us in 2016 he was in hot water for sharing that traditional belief about marriage.
That is probably the most consistent, universally held human principle of the existence of humankind. And for me to be fired because I said that in a book written on my own time is just unthinkable.
But the city said they fired him for breaking their ethics code on taking outside work by publishing his book without clearing it first. Atlanta mayor at the time, Kasim Reed, said the material in Chief Cochran's book is inconsistent with the administration's work to make Atlanta a more welcoming city for all of her citizens. But a city investigation found Cochran never discriminated against anyone.
They themselves, who have interacted with me personally, can say from their own testimony that Chief Cochran has created an atmosphere where everybody looks forward to coming to work every day, and he deliberately did things to eliminate any barriers that created an atmosphere where no one was able to give their very best.
The city council voted 11-3 this week to approve the settlement. Christian law firm Alliance Defending Freedom represents Cochran. They say they hope this settlement will be a deterrent to any government that would trample upon constitutionally protected freedoms. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi, great report. Thank you. Up next, why a mother of 8 and professor at Catholic University is taking on France's president. And the March for Life unveils its new theme for the 46th annual event. A mother of 8 and assistant professor at the Catholic University of America is taking on the president of France. At issue, remarks made by Emmanuel Macron last month.
Please present me the lady who decided, being perfectly educated, to have 7, 8, 9 children. Please present me the young girl who decided to leave school at 10 in order to be married at 12.
Now, most people agree with the president on his remarks about child brides, but what he said about educated women not having large families led to this huge social media campaign. #Postcards for Macron. And joining us now is the woman who started that campaign, Dr. Catherine Kollek. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Lauren.
Hi. You have an undergraduate degree from the University of Pennsylvania, a master's degree, and a PhD from Harvard, and as we heard earlier, 8 children.
Yes.
Gosh, why did you find his comments so offensive?
So I did not find them offensive as much as an opportunity to highlight that many people with a high school education, a college education, an advanced education might still choose to have 7, 8, or 9 children.
Let's take a look at this social media campaign, this Twitter campaign you started a few days ago.
Yeah.
Look at this, thousands of tweets. And it's women who have 11, 8, 7, 9. They're all here, all educated, all with their family. Did the volume surprise you?
It did. I have to say that a month ago, 3 days ago, I had 300 tweets to my name and 300 followers. So I expected maybe 3 postcards. So yeah, I woke up the next morning and thought, well,
you struck a nerve.
It did strike a nerve. And that's what's very interesting, is why is this struck a nerve?
And why do you think, especially for Catholic women, why do you think it has?
I think it has because many of these women who are like myself and like the women I'm seeing posts from France and from Russia and from now in all over Africa, I think it's because it's a kind of hidden group. We're used to the pejorative comments, you know, don't you know how that happens? Don't you know where babies come from, right? And this sounded like it was a piece with that.
Right. Now, in his speech, President Macron expressed concerns for young girls in Africa and the concept of being able to choose fertility. Yeah. After having had the opportunity of education, now, would you agree that completing a certain level of education before motherhood is something that varies with where you live in the world, and that women in the United States do have an advantage in that department. Is that true, false?
I don't know if I'd want to use the word advantage, right? That we have certain advantages and we have certain disadvantages from our cultural viewpoint. Education is always a plus. It's always something we should support. Absolutely, women should complete a certain amount of education before they get married, and they should absolutely have the chance to choose their family size, right? In love and in a Christian supportive marriage, right? We're all in favor of that. But I think that there's a kind of solidarity we can have with our sisters overseas, the ones who choose to have large families. As one woman tweeted this morning, and I thought it was so interesting, "Thank you for calling attention to the fact that it isn't just Africans who have large families."
Very good. We will leave it there. Yeah. Dr. Catherine Kollek, thank you so much for joining us. Assistant professor at the Catholic University of America, highly accomplished woman, mother of 8 children, and of a successful social media campaign.
Welcome. Thank you.
The theme for the 46th annual March for Life is announced. Pro-life is pro-science.
Science and technology are on the side of truth and on the side of life. And so we just wanted to lead with scientific fact this year, showing that it's 100% on the side of life.
March for Life President Jeannie Mancini made the announcement today alongside journalist David DeLeiden and doctors David Prentice and Gracie Christie. They shared scientific evidence that life begins at conception. The 2019 March for Life will be January 18th right here in Washington. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night and God bless you.